Hello, I'm gonna make a video today about several things, really for no reason, and it's not gonna be my best video, which isn't saying much, but I've been through a lot in the last couple weeks, but I've also had some good experiences, so I'll share those. These here are some books I've recently purchased. I also have one library book here, but I'll get to it. So here, this one, the Brooklyn novels. Now, before today, I had never heard of this book, but I looked closer into it, and it's a novel about the 1930s in Brooklyn. And this author, he later became a Hollywood writer, screenwriter, but he was born in 1909, so that makes him in his early to mid 20s in the 1930s. So, and recently, just for fun and just for a distraction, I've been planning a story about an Austrian man born in 1899 who went to America in the mid-1930s to escape, fascism in Italy, Hitler's National Socialist Party, and then in Austria they had a assassination and civil war around the mid-1930s. So I'm kind of writing a monologue, stream of consciousness type thing where he left to America, and the main focus of the book is going to be about salvation and classical music. But I'm having a hard time. The hardest part for me is getting the language down that they would use back then. And I've been looking in books published in the 1930s, like The Sleepwalkers by Herman Broch. I've looked at Elias Canetti, his book Auto da Fe, or The Blinding. It's published in, I think, 1935, something like that. Several other books, and some books before and after. But anyway, this one here is just kind of to get an idea of actually like what someone of that time wrote. Now, I've read John Dos Passos, and he's good for it, but it's always good to get more evidence. This is quite a thick book, though, as you can see. Now, the second one here, By Night Under the Stone Bridge, it's by Leo Perutz. And this is a historical novel. It was published, I think, in the 1950s. But this author was born 1881, I believe. And he was friends with Herman Broch and all those guys. This one I got mainly because he was friends with Herman Broch and those other people, but also it seems like he was an enjoyable writer, and I think it'll be cool to read about. I think this is about Bohemia in like the 1500s, and it kind of seems like an allegorical story, so that'll be neat. And then these other couple here. This first one, The Mystery Doc by Matthew McIntosh. That's actually the book I've been focusing on most recently. I'm about halfway through now, and it is quite long page-wise, 1,669 pages. But it reads very quickly because I'll open it up here and show. This is a good page. So you see there are pictures from a movie. And I'll just turn. So it's chapter 2. Some pages are like this. Some pages are, like a normal narrative. And then, see this, one word. The oldest rock, 3.96 billion years, Northwest Territories, Canada. Oldest evidence of life, 3.3 billion years. Dinosaurs. The plot thickens. And then, see some are blotted out. Rather mysterious picture, historical picture, and so on. But this novel is very interesting. It was just published October 3rd, I think. Technically it came out October 3rd, but it caught my eye because the title, first of all, because I feel like the internet has been such a large effect on contemporary society, and literature has not responded well to it, at least yet. Now, I know generally literature is one of the slower art forms. I think that's fair to say. I think music, at least to an extent, has incorporated the internet quite well. But definitely novels have not in any way. There are only a few novels that try to do stuff with it. I know like Joshua Cohen and this other guy, the Luminarium, Alex something, Shakar, I think. But I haven't read either of those. The Book of Numbers by Joshua Cohen. And I'm not even sure if those actually deal with the internet. I just know their plot involves part of the internet. But this one here, one of the main strings of plot is a chat box, like a chat window on a website. And one of the very, very interesting parts of it, this isn't spoiling anything because I think one of the first pages and also part of the advertising has this. It's a visitor 1969, I think is what the name is, joins a chat window and they're talking to someone named Michelle. And the first thing they ask is, are you a real person or are you just an automated response program? And then they say, no, I'm real, and then they put a smiley face. But the author does a very clever thing where some of the responses are so repetitive that sometimes you think, is this a real person? Or is it so repetitive that it's a program? But then the author includes spelling errors. So then that makes you think, well, is this a program that is including spelling errors to increase the believability of it? Or is it a person who is in fact telling the truth? And I think that's a very interesting part of the internet because especially with the anonymity where one person can pretend to be 10 different people, or the other way around, several different people can pretend to be the same person. And then also the Turing test, that type of stuff where, some people who don't read poetry look at these poetry generators and they can't tell if it's a robot writing the poetry or if it's a real person. So I think that small part of this book is very interesting. It also includes email, cell phones, all that type of stuff. So, and also another quick connection I'll make. This is kind of a like formal connection, like relating to the form. It does very much remind me of the Lost Scrapbook. And I think even in one review I read of this book that they did actually use the term scrapbook to describe the form this book takes. Because a lot of the scenes are disjointed, where even some scenes, it'll be 3 concurrent scenes, maybe like you'd imagine in a movie. But in this book, they're split, where you may get one line from the first scene, and then the next line is from the second scene, and then the next line is from the first scene, and then the next line is from the third scene. And it does switch like that, but it's never confusing, at least to me. I mean, it's confusing in that way that it's not completely obvious and chronological, but it's not a burden. The confusion adds something to it, although I have seen one review on Goodreads that I had to respond to. They didn't even read the whole book, and they said that the book was too hard to understand, and they implied that that was the author's fault. So I had to respond to that. That maybe in fact it is not the author's fault that is confusing or not able to be understood. That's actually what they were trying to say, that there's no meaning to be had. But anyway, I highly recommend this book. And the length, it's 1,600 pages, but it reads so quickly. It only took me, I don't know, 5-6 hours to read 800 pages, which, and I was probably going fairly slow. But anyway, I'd really recommend it. And an interesting thing about it is if you buy the hardcover, you can get a free EPUB online through the author's website. Now, another new book that just came out is The Way of Florida by Russell Person. Now, this is a historical fiction about the Narvaez expedition through America in the I think early 1500s. And as you can see, several contemporary authors and an editor, Sam Lipsyte, Brian Evanson, Michael Kimball, and Gordon Lish. This also just came out, I think, October 1st, actually. But the thing that got me interested in this book is, first of all, I read his interview that he has on his, he has a link to a website, and I read the interview that he gave, and it was very interesting because you can tell he's a very intelligent person, and in an interview he gave, he talks about how he would write, and he said basically that any time he would write in a everyday speech pattern, I guess you could say, he would instinctively change it, and sometimes not instinctively. He would go out of his way to change it. But if you want to read part of that, it's told in an interesting way, and for whatever reason, and I'm not saying this is actually there, but I was getting feelings from similar to Cormac McCarthy when I was reading this. And it's really not in the same style at all. But I would say the similarity is the unique writing style, because anyone who's read Blood Meridian can tell you that there is no other book written like it at all. And part of it is because of the interesting syntax he uses, but also it's the archaic language all mixed together, and how he speaks to the reader for elevated effect. But this is interesting. It's a very, very interesting book. The fish in clouds around us. Mostly they're little, paragraphs. I haven't read this book too much yet. I've been more focusing on the mystery by Matthew McIntosh, but this one's coming up soon, I would say. Seems to have gotten good reviews so far from people I've heard. And this one here is Auto da Fe by Elias Canetti, who won the Nobel Prize in 1981. but he was born in, I think, 1905, I want to say. This is a library book, obviously. This book is very interesting. It starts out here with a morning walk, which I just noticed that a lot of Austrian novels and German novels from that era are about walking. And I just put it together too that Marcel Proust, The Way by Swan, that the title in itself is about walking by Swan's house. So, yeah, and then also Walter Benjamin has the focus of the flaneur. So it's an interesting theme. But he starts here talking to a kid who is admiring the books. And he says he's interested in China. And the main character is a sinologist, Professor Peter Kien, a tall, emaciated figure, man of learning and specialist in sinology. It was his custom on his morning walk between 7 and 8 o'clock to look into the window of every bookshop he passed. He was thus able to assure himself with a kind of pleasure that smut and trash were daily gaining ground. He himself was the owner of the most important private library in the whole of this great city. He carried a minute portion of it with him wherever he went. His passion for it, the only one he had permitted himself during a life of austere and exacting study, moved him to take special precautions. Books, even bad ones, tempted him easily into making a purchase. So this is a very interesting book so far. I've only read 50 pages or so. But I'm kind of using it as research also for that story I'm writing. And then Elias Canetti has been one of my recent interests. So I found a book today by him, The Human Province, which is a book of aphorisms mostly, but it's more or less a notebook. It also has extended portions like you'd see in Pascal's Thoughts or something maybe from Thomas Brown. But I wanted to use my headphones for a bookmark. I wanted to say a couple here because this is a good page here. And the one I thought was very interesting, this was in 1944, obviously. Bad writers wipe away the traces of metamorphosis. Good writers display them. And I thought that was very interesting. And it strikes me as true immediately, but I think it does have to be deciphered. And I always love aphorisms like this one. They talk of instincts as though they were albatrosses. There's one by Joseph Joubert that I love that's similar to that one. Beautiful clothes are a sign of joy. That's like one of the best aphorisms I've read in my life. And then this one here, that woman who admitted at a gathering that she had never had a dream, and instantly she became a monkey to everyone. But yeah, this book is very interesting. It's just a bunch of provocative thoughts. And speaking of the Nobel Prize, I don't know, I've given up hope. But along with this kind of theme, well, of course, I have those two contemporary books that just came out literally weeks ago, but along with this theme of books from the 1930s or authors, or 1920s, 30s, that time period that I love so much, I recently saw this movie that is called Menschen am Sonntag, People on Sunday, and it's called a movie without actors, and I found it because I was researching Berlin in the 1920s and 30s, because Berlin had a huge cultural efflorescence during that time, where there was an explosion of film, there was an explosion of during the 1920s, just exploded. And they were also, I know from the time period, there were two British authors, Stephen Spendler and Christopher Isherwood, who wrote about it. And I almost today bought Stephen Spendler's autobiography of the time period, World Within World, which follows 1929 to 1939, I think. I didn't get it though, because it may just end up being like research, where I just read it once, take the ideas, and then be done with it. So I'm gonna check it out at the library. But it did seem very interesting. Another author I've been interested in from that time period, a little earlier actually, but Robert Walser, who oddly enough was also very focused on walks. And I can't help but feel like displaced nostalgia for that, because especially if anyone lives in America, and I'm sure Canada is not different, that you can't walk anywhere. You have to drive. And it just, you just drive around this little bubble that, it is somewhat precious. I've always thought that cars by default have either 2 or 4 seats. I think it would take a completely different species for cars to only have 1 seat in them. But it is weird that, we drive around these little bubbles, not interacting with each other, except in usually some violent manner, road rage. And I don't know, walking just seems... It definitely has a different character than driving does, to say the least. But yeah, anyway, Robert Walser is pretty interesting. One of the most significant movies I watched recently was by the brothers Quay, I think they go by, Quay, and it's called The Institut Benyamenta, which is based on Walser's book Jacob von Gunten, which is about like a butler school or something. But I take it that the movie does deviate quite far from the book, because the movie, to use a quote from Faulkner, it's so modern I don't understand any of it. He said that about one of his own poems. He said, "This poem is so modern I don't understand any of it." But yeah, it's an extremely good movie. It has, I can't remember his name right now, but Mark Rylance, who's the main actor, and he's great. But I guess the last book I'll talk about here, as nice and visual, is this Picasso, The Early Years. And Picasso's early paintings are one of my favorites. I have a harder time appreciating his later works, but his early stuff is one of my favorites by far. Let's see. The glare. It's rather annoying. Let me see if I can fix that. It's a self-portrait. Oh, and this painting is really interesting. It's used in the cover of Herman Broch's The Sleepwalkers, the recent one published by Vintage. I thought that was neat that they used a Picasso painting from 1900. But I don't really know what it is about Picasso's early works that I like so much, but I really love his blue period, which is when he was in his early 20s. Mother and child. I love this painting, how he did the backs of the women. And then later, of course, he has his red period, which is when he paints the circus people. I'd say my two favorite, there's one, Garçon à la pipe. That's one of my favorite paintings of his. And then the other one is the Ironing Woman. Oh, was that it? Yeah, this one. Woman Ironing. 1904. That's one of my favorite paintings in the world. That and Garçon à la pipe. Yeah, I really love Picasso's early works. He was born in 1880, I think, so he was in his early 20s in 1900 to 1906 when these were done. I really like the sinister character of this. The actor looks like some sort of demon. But yeah, so I hope you guys enjoyed this. We're about to put up a podcast of Ivandara on our podcast channel, A Tale Told by an Idiot podcast. So you can probably listen to that in about a week or so. Maybe, yeah, about a week. So if you're interested in that, we also have 4 episodes up already. Fernando Pessoa, Frank O'Hara, Carlos Drummond J. Andrade, and then Hart Crane we just did. And then we're going to have Evan Dara, the contemporary American author. And then I'll also put a link. One of my friends has a SoundCloud where he uploads guitar music. So if you want to listen to some good music, I'll put a link to that. And also I'll just throw links to my Goodreads and Twitter and Instagram too if anyone wants to inveigle me. So, well, thanks for watching if you enjoyed it. Death is a gang boss.